AI and ChatGPT right now is a bit like the iPhone moment we had some years back, where it completely changed the way we thought about computing. And that's why the opportunities are big.
Welcome to the latest episode of Tech.Rulez.Period. My guest today says transformation is continuous, the digital world has no target picture, and enterprises need to deal with that new normal. Welcome, André Christ.
Thanks for having me.
You're the founder of LeanIX. You call it the Google Maps of software. You have been around for more than 10 years now, so it's not it's basically a scale up, right? So if you look to our first hypothesis in Tech.Rulez.Period, where we say technology is bigger than only IT, how would you describe the last 10 years that you have been around, and how do you see that shift, or do you actually support that hypothesis? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I fully support it. If I think back how we started more than 10 years ago, we focused a lot on the IT in companies. And if I talk about IT, often people think about like the internal IT systems in an organization. So think about systems like Salesforce for CRM or your ERP systems. So mostly what the employees use to do their work. And when we looked at that 10 years ago, it was all about how can we come up with a better architecture, better connections of all those systems. Now, if we think forward to today, there's not only the employee experience, which is super relevant. Today, the customer experience is crucial. And that's why the shift has moved a lot also from like just looking at the internal IT systems, also towards what's actually out there. How do customers interact with your products? And that's why thinking about IT is too little. And we also see that reflected in a lot of the roles of the CIOs or the CTOs today. They're mostly combined roles now. They're not only like owning the internal IT landscape, but they also more and more own the customer facing systems. So think about like the websites where people interact with, or the customer service systems. And I think what it best reflects is probably like 10 years ago, we talked a lot about like two speeds of IT. The different.
I remember that.
You remember that? Yeah. So, and it was all about, okay, we can build those systems super fast, but the problem is actually that the systems towards the customer can't work without the systems in the backend. So you can't get an order processed if a customer gets to the website, or you can't log into those systems, because then you have multiple accounts across those systems. So I think what a lot of the people have realized now is actually that there is no separation between like the front end systems towards the customer and the back end systems towards the employees. So it has to be much more combined actually, and that's why I think it's much more than IT. It's broader, and people have understood that you can only consider it as like technology management in the end, probably. And I feel it's almost maybe even the better term. Yeah.
And if you say customer experience compared to employee experience, if you look at architecture, it's such a dry topic. Yeah. How did you make it emotional? What was your key success formula? Can you explain a bit about that one?
Yeah, I think the way companies manage technology has changed so much. So if you think back maybe even more than 10 years, like 15 years, there was the gatekeeper, the CIO or the IT director. Whatever you purchased as software went through that person. And what has changed definitely is that it's no longer that way. Today, software is purchased and procured everywhere in the organization. Yeah. So everyone with a credit card can do it. And it probably started when Salesforce many years ago said, so we're not a software. Yeah. So Salesforce is not a software. And they actually went to completely change that market. And in that sense, I think what we see a lot is that the way like organizations interact with that software has also completely changed. So and a lot of the companies talk about like shadow IT coming up in different areas. We prefer actually to say like it's great that people can procure and buy software to increase productivity, increase employee experience on their own. but it's no longer that there's just an IT organization who's like governing all of that. Yeah, so that has definitely changed.
That part of the conversation we just had brings me to the second hypothesis that we have, where we basically say that technology stewardship needs to sit on board level to make wise decisions. To how you have described your solution, I mean, that could be a great benefit for those decision makers. What's your experience on how your solution helps making wise decision on board level?
Yeah, maybe let's start with the why. Why is it so necessary? I think what we see in a lot of the transformation initiatives across IT, that it's actually not only affecting like replacing a software version or upgrading a license, but it typically also affects a lot of the processes. And if you don't place such decisions, and the important ones, into a board conversation, what happens is very downstream in the process, very late in the big programs, you actually find out that you have dependencies or that you're changing things and you haven't thought and discussed about it. Yeah, so it's not just like there's someone in one part of the organization upgrading like a system. So it's much wider. Think about like warehouses in logistics as an example. You wouldn't also like just replace a warehouse technology without informing all the other involved parties. And I think it's very similar today in technology. And that's why it's important to get across like a roadmap, a target state for a transformation program and look into the future. So how will it actually look like in 1, 2, 3 years? And I had an interesting conversation some while ago where someone told me like, we're going to approve something like 40 to 50 million of budget every month, but we sometimes do not have actually an idea what we're going to do with that budget. Are we actually in introducing new applications? Are we taking out technology? And I think what helps in those conversations is to break down the complexity and make it simpler to grasp. And it can be like that you have to actually have an understanding after we've invested the money, what has changed? Which processes got better? Which systems got renewed? How much more time do I maybe have also with the reskilling of more people? Because for some parts in those big organizations, well, they are going to run out of skills eventually because the people who can actually still maintain those systems will no longer be there. So it's in the end probably like those different dimensions to get them across in a simple way. And that's why I think it's important to differentiate between where are we starting from, kind of the as is in the landscape, in the architecture, where are you actually heading, and then painting a stepwise picture so that people understand how much money do I invest this year to actually come closer to my transformation target and what's going to be left for the years to come. And I think the big trick is getting it across in a very, very simple way and breaking it down. So this is what keeps us motivated in making the part of transformations a bit easier to digest.
Okay. And that brings me to another aspect we currently hear a lot, the buzz in the media about artificial intelligence. And what's LeanIX views on that technology? Have you built it in already? Are you going to embrace that technology? What's your personal view on it? Around artificial intelligence?
Yeah, maybe I start with the latter. Yeah. So LeanIX has raised a ton of money over the last 10 years, so more than 100 million of investor money. And if you ask my investors, the word AI and ML has never been in any pitch deck. So I'm very, very critical about the topic. Okay. So I've never used the term before. Probably many other products and ideas have been like, well, that's the AI for X and the AI for whatever. We have always thought about like, what's the problem to solve? And a lot of the technologies, a lot of the software products, I think were more analytical solutions rather than really machine learning. What has changed now with the arrival of especially ChatGPT, which we've all seen in the media, is real commoditization of the technology. So all of a sudden, everybody can use it. Like my parents, everybody is like moving from, okay, we're no longer Googling, we're now using ChatGPT to answer our questions. And that's why I think this drives to really raise the bar for organizations. You no longer need to think about like neural networks and the very specifics of AI or ML models, but all of a sudden you can actually use AI just as an API. So you can so think about like data centers. In the past, you had to run your servers and stuff. But then like the hyperscalers with Microsoft and AWS and Google arrived, and you could easily use all those computing resources. And now it's very similar with those large language models. You can just use them as an API. And I think this introduces a lot of opportunities for companies. And the companies are actually approaching us as well, say like, how can we build a roadmap to understand in what systems, in what processes can we now introduce the power of generative AI? And what we've done, we've launched what we call the LeanIX AI Assistant, which actually helps companies in the topic of enterprise architecture, where they can complete their documentation faster, do research quicker. So for example, give me alternative products for the software I have. So I do not need to go to Google or do like time-consuming research. I can actually go directly into a large language model and get information out there. Or I can take all the information we have about a landscape and ask the large language model, give me a recommendation. So for example, for the next board meeting, summarize what are the most important points and send an email upfront to inform the most important stakeholders. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in there. And what I get played back is that people are very eager to understand very tangible, very concrete use cases instead of like fluffy stuff. Yeah. So exactly. Yeah. So how can we make it tangible? And I think this has happened. So it's super exciting what's going on right now.
Even though I don't think you will answer that straight away, what I'm going to ask you now, but some competitors or in other areas, people say about 30 to 40% efficiency gains with artificial intelligence if they build that into their product. Would you call out a number of how much you can be faster in inventorizing, for example, interfaces or like the enterprise architecture?
Yeah, I think it's probably a bit too early still to quantify it. I see a really big impact. I completely agree to this idea of like AI and ChatGPT right now is a bit like the iPhone moment we had some years back, where it completely changed the way we thought about computing. And that's why the opportunities are big. And also we are investing into making it available very quick, because what we see with ChatGPT is that the power of the community is now there. People explore it and try out. And through this, new use cases get developed. So I think we're only at the beginning of that. I think it's important to stay very critical. You can't solve everything with it. It just doesn't make sense to throw a large language model at all kinds of problems. But there are problems, and some very tedious ones. So that's why the productivity gains are clearly there, where it totally makes sense. And I mean, if you've seen, for example, the way Photoshop gets enhanced, where you can now complete pictures, it's really stunning what that technology can bring to life. And I'm fortunate to be with LeanIX in a space where we help companies bring new technology into their landscapes. And I think there's a long period ahead of us where it's going to be all around, like no longer like the digital transformation, but really like how do we bring the power of AI into the systems, and think about also the reskilling of people, because there have been jobs in the past, and now they get into different roles, into other roles. So I really firmly believe it's an opportunity rather than a big threat. And people in tech have the responsibility to now help with this big transformation, actually.
I like the view of being sort of critical and try to objectivize that technology on a day-to-day basis and have a bit of a decent at arm's length view on the hype that is out there. Shifting now rather from your platform and the solution and this wider conversation to what's your personal view on society and technology in general? How do you look at that? Also picking up maybe the entrepreneurial founder landscape, you being a founder, right? What do you suggest people in the technology space that are going to found something or going to put an idea in practice?
Yeah. Look, I mean, I started co-founded the company because first of all, I'm a firm believer in the topic of like architecture and technology. However, I also think that it's very important to come up with new big technology companies. It's been a big dream like 10 years back, and it's still a big dream that we can actually play a significant role on a global scale and help help to kind of foster transformations in companies. What I see is if I, for example, look back 50 years ago, SAP was founded, and so 10 years ago, LeanIX and a number of other software companies were founded in Germany. But in between, there have been a couple, but there's not been much. So a lot of the inventions came from other places around the world. And that's why what keeps me motivated every day to push forward is really like, how can we like restart a bit this idea that we can build great technology companies, even from Germany. Yeah. So again, and not only from all around the world. And that's why I think there's a number of fantastic companies out there. I feel there's a growing ecosystem. However, we are now a bit in a downturn, obviously, in terms of financing, in terms of the recession we're all seeing. That also hurts a lot of the companies being founded like 1, 2, 3 years ago. So I'm a little bit skeptic at the moment that some of those great ideas will actually die because the money is running out. So that's going to be tough. So we need to continue be brave and invest again in order to start. So I fear on the one hand side that some of the founders might even move back and say like, oh, this is a tough time, so they move out. So we have to make sure that there's enough like founders and optimism coming back even despite maybe a difficult macro climate. So that's why I'm a optimist, and I hope that with LeanIX and with founding that company, we contribute a little bit to a growing ecosystem of software companies, and also to those companies which like might not be the most attractive, it's the easiest topic. So thankfully you said like we're something like the Google Maps for software, to make it as simple as possible. But obviously it's important that even some of those niche ideas, which take a long time to grow and to become bigger, that they are still attractive for people to get started in. And so that's what I try to support where I can, and I hope there's enough ground for more growth in Germany.
Okay. I mean, you're a great example, needless to say, on founding your own enterprise. Last week, I had a conversation with an American entrepreneur, and he said, the problem with these Europeans is you always, and especially the Germans, you always look for a plan B. And the plan B takes you so much time. You better invest on a plan A and just make it work. What's your view on that quite American view?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a valid thought. There's also a larger investor from Germany say like, even if you look the documentation of startup investments, it's a lot around downside protection. So what happens? Exactly. What happens if it doesn't go right? Yeah. So of course, I mean, from an investor perspective, it's probably also easier to say, because if you invest into 10 companies, it's sometimes sufficient if 1 or 2 get crazy successful, and even if 8 are gonna die. Yeah. So it's tough from the founder side, because if you're one of those 8, then you've spent a ton of your like important years in life and you never got anywhere. Yeah, and that's why it's probably also it also depends on from where you look at it and from what role. Definitely, I think that there's much more optimism, of course, in probably that culture in the US, and that's why they are also probably more successful here and there. Yeah, so that they're trying out more, and that they're not too busy with all the bureaucracy and the downside protection behind it. We have an important example with looking at the AI Act, a law of the European Union, which is going to be created over the next couple of months. We need to be extremely careful if that law is becoming super complicated for companies to do AI. Right? Well, then we're more busy with like all the downside protection than understanding how we build maybe great products out of it. And I think it's still important. I'm very convinced that in Germany or in Europe, we have very good data protection there, very good data privacy standards, and I don't want to give them up, not at all. But we have to find a way to combine it, because otherwise, maneuvering around, but really like get both sides balanced. And I think that's important, and we need to be careful to what degree we need to protect stuff, and what is also a super sensitive application, what not. And otherwise, you're actually too busy all the time with complying and protecting, and others are just going faster.
Cool, André. Thank you very much for the time, the the Google Maps of software, LeanIX. Thanks for being with us. Thank you also for your word of caution on AI. I think that's, not a common statement that we always hear, staying at arm's length at the bus of what is going on there. And then I think in the last part of the conversation, I took a bit away on policies. Yeah, that's good, and they need to be there around AI. But we also need to be careful that we are not, preventing entrepreneurship to strive. Yeah? So thanks for the great conversation, and see you around.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It was a pleasure.
Bye-bye.